Hello and welcome to the Owl's Nest. Today we are going to be doing a team preview of the Seoul Dynasty. The Seoul Dynasty went through a lot of roster changes in the 2020 offseason, so we're going to go through those and then go through their schedule, try to predict their wins and losses, and work from there. So first up, the two most notable departures for the Seoul Dynasty are going to be Fisher and Ryu Jae-hong, both joining the Vancouver Titans. Overall, I feel like these players kind of underperformed for Seoul in the 2019 season, so losing them to Vancouver I don't think will hurt them that much, and if anything will probably negatively affect Vancouver. They also lost Munchkin, who is going to be playing for the Boston Uprising, and they lost their star DPS Fleta, who I think that he's expendable once we go over their recent acquisitions, but he'll be playing for the Shanghai Dragons next year. Other names they lost were Jesse, the support player, and Hailey, the support player, who Hailey ended up going to the London Spitfire, so we'll see if he can rebound there. Now going into players that they have recently acquired, they have acquired Profit and Gesture, the two star players from the London Spitfire. I think these will be great players in Seoul. They're living in Korea and playing for the Korean team in the Overwatch League, which I think will be great for them. As well as, I think they have a really high skill ceiling. I don't think Gesture's Reinhardt is there quite yet, but they still have Marvel there who he can switch off with, as well as Michelle and Zunba will still be there as well. As well, they have signed DPS player Illicit and support player Creative. So I think overall we have a lot more balanced roster for the Seoul Dynasty if you look at who's still on the team. And they still have Fitz, Illicit, Profit, all at DPS, so I think that'll be good for them. If I could change one thing about this roster, I would like to see maybe one more DPS player. They only have 3 signed currently, but Profit is such a versatile player and has such a large hero pool that I don't think that'll matter too much for them. But yeah, that would be the one thing I'd change from an already pretty solid roster. So now let's go ahead and break down the Seoul Dynasty's 2020 schedule. Alright, so next up we have the schedule of the Seoul Dynasty, and we're going to start with Seoul versus Hangzhou, and I'm going to go ahead and give this win to the Seoul Dynasty, so I'm going to count that as a W. I like what Hangzhou is doing, but I think Seoul is kind of a super team for next year, so I'm going to go ahead and give them a win. Next up is going to be Seoul versus Shanghai. I'm going to say Seoul loses this for the sole reason, no pun intended, that this game is being played in Shanghai. It's a homestand for the Dragons, and I feel like Shanghai has improved quite a bit, and I was really impressed with their matches at their exhibition, so I'm going to go ahead and give Shanghai the win there. I'm going to call it a bit of an upset though. Next up, we have the Dynasty versus the Valiant. I'm going to go ahead and say Seoul wins this. I'm pretty worried about the Valiant next year. I think they'll sneak a few close wins, but I think overall it's going to be kind of a bummer season for them. And next up is the Dallas Fuel. I'm going to say Seoul wins that as well. Dallas has definitely improved, but they are not as strong as Seoul, and they haven't improved as much as Seoul has. Next up is such a heavyweight match. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be Vancouver versus Seoul. Vancouver has definitely took a step back with their release of Bumper and by signing Fisher and Ryu Jae-hong, whereas Seoul has improved quite a bit by signing Profit and Gesture. I think I'm going to give this win to Seoul. Kind of shocking considering how strong the Titans are, especially last year compared to where Seoul is, but I think the improvements that the Dynasty made are going to be really helpful to them. So I'm going to give that win to the Seoul Dynasty. Next up is the Gladiators. I also believe this will be a win for them. And then we have the Shock. I'm going to say they lose to the Shock. I think the Shock are still the same powerhouse they were last year. The meta's definitely changed, but I don't think it's changed enough that the Shock would be bad. So I'm going to say they lose that one. Next up, we have the Chengdu Hunters. I believe that Seoul should win that. Chengdu is kind of a wild card team. You can never tell how strong they really are. But I think I'm going to give that one to Seoul. Next up is the Guangzhou Charge. The Guangzhou Charge have also drastically improved. However, I do think Seoul will win that as well. So overall, if we look at the first February to March for the Seoul Dynasty, I have them winning 7 of their 9 matches, which I think overall is a pretty solid improvement for them. Next up, we have Seoul versus Vancouver again. I'm going to give this one to Vancouver. I think it'll be close, but I think just to split the difference, I think that there's such an even matchup that I think it'll be a split series. Next up is going to be the San Francisco Shock. I'm going to say that the Shock win that one too. So I think Seoul will lose both their matchups to the Shock. But then they get Dallas the week after, which they should win. Same reasons as earlier. And then the Valiant, I think that will also be a win. And the Gladiator should also be a win. So after starting this period with 2 losses, they'll take 3 wins after. And then I also believe they'll beat Chengdu again. And I believe they'll beat Hangzhou again. Next up is the Houston Outlaws. I believe they'll beat them. Both teams have drastically improved, by the way. Houston is looking a lot better than they did last year, but I think Seoul does have the edge there. And then once again with the Philadelphia Fusion, I think Philly has improved quite a bit. However, I don't see them stopping Seoul. So we'll give that a win. And then next up is the Washington Justice. I think Seoul should have no problem with them. So overall, we're seeing kind of the same, winning 7 out of 9 of the series here as well. And then next up is going to be the Florida Mayhem. I think Seoul has that one. Florida is definitely going to be a little bit better next year, but I don't think they're as good as Seoul. Next up is going to be Seoul versus the Atlanta Reign. I'm going to say Seoul wins that one. I think Atlanta has also, they haven't necessarily improved, but they ended so well last year that I feel like they'll be still strong next year, and they're keeping a lot of the same players around, so that'll be really good for them. Next up is the Shanghai Dragons. I believe Seoul will win this one. The match is being played in China, as you can see, but I think that Shanghai, I don't think that Shanghai is strong enough to beat Seoul twice. But then again, we have no idea what the meta will be by then. A lot of this is just pure speculation based off what we know about Overwatch now. By June of next year, it could be completely different. Next up is going to be Guangzhou and Seoul. I'm going to say actually Guangzhou gets this one. I think Guangzhou has improved and shown enough potential that I could see them splitting the series with the Seoul Dynasty. Next up is the London Spitfire. This will be kind of a fun match to watch because it'll be Prophet and Jester playing their former team, and I do believe they will beat their former team, so I'm going to give that as a win to the Seoul Dynasty. London still has a pretty good roster for next year, but I do not think it'll be as strong as what we are seeing from the Seoul Dynasty. Next up is going to be a good test though against the New York Excelsior. I'm going to say New York gets that. I like Seoul, but New York is such an established team, and especially because the game is in the regular season and not the postseason, I think New York has a pretty good shot there. Next up is going to be the Toronto Defiant. Toronto has also improved quite a bit. However, I do not think they have improved as much as Seoul has. So I'm going to say that is going to be a win for the Seoul Dynasty. Then finally, we have the Boston Uprising versus the Seoul Dynasty. That should be a pretty easy win for Seoul. I'm pretty worried about Boston. We'll get to them eventually, but I think Seoul has that. And then we have the Paris Eternal as the last matchup for the Seoul Dynasty. I believe they will win that. Don't sleep on Paris. Paris has gotten a lot better. However, I do not think they are nearly as good as the Dynasty. So overall, I have the Dynasty losing 6 matches total next year. So that would be an overall record of 22-6. So now let's go put this in a summary. So as I mentioned, I do see the Seoul Dynasty going 22-6 next season. And some of those losses can kind of be up in the air, but that's where I have them right now. And I think we will finally see the Seoul Dynasty team that Korean Overwatch fans have really wanted to see. I know Season 1 was a bit of a disappointment. They went in as the definite frontrunners to win it all, and they didn't even make the playoffs. And then if you look at their performance in Season 2, it was definitely better, but I think the expectations are so high for Overwatch in Seoul that this might finally be the Overwatch team that the Dynasty have really wanted to see. And I think overall it'll be great for them. I love the additions of Prophet and Gesture, and I think that'll honestly be what the team needs to take them over the top. They definitely showed potential with players like Fitz and Marvel last year, but I think this is finally it. So anyway, what are your guys' thoughts on the Seoul Dynasty going into the 2020 Overwatch League season? Do you guys share the same optimism that I have, or do you think they might be worse for some reason? Or do you think some of the matches I predicted